Hello and welcome to Inside Music, episode number 161. I'm your host, James Shotwell, and it's great to be with you again. My guest this week is none other than Jon Beatty, the co-founder, host, or co-host of Brewtally Speaking, a music podcast that some of you may have heard of, and if you're one of the ones who haven't, you need to be listening. Jon has been in the music industry for several years now, but his life really started taking off in the last 3 after launching his own podcast, which eventually became Brewtally Speaking, as you'll learn in this conversation. Now, Jon and I both live in West Michigan, which admittedly isn't the first place people think of when they think of music or music journalism, but right now there's kind of a revolution going on, not only here, but in small towns and C-level markets all over the country, and that is that the voices of the people who are most passionate about music are the ones rising to the top. And Jon is one of those people who puts in the work because he gives a damn about what he's doing. Brewtally Speaking is a well-researched podcast that has a number of fantastic guests from all over the alternative scene talking about things that you can only hear right there on the show. And some of their guests have given them the kind of content that causes headlines to be created, while others have just given them a good chat that's fun to listen to. Jon's going to tell me a little bit about his approach to doing this, as well as the impetus and the minor role that I played in it during the course of this conversation. We also talk about interview etiquette, journalism etiquette, grudges, and really what's in store in the future, because as I'm sure most of you know, music journalism is really at a inflection point. By that I mean it's at a point where things are changing. The traditional way of doing things has gone to the wayside. Magazines aren't as popular anymore. People aren't necessarily reading music blogs. However, there are still a lot of great influencers out there, and I hate using that term, but it's really what applies best. There are people who are influencing what people care about, and therefore, influencers. You see this with people like The Needle Drop on YouTube or Zane Lowe with Beats One. And I think that we're going to see a lot more individuality and less grouping, less publication, so to say. But how people get to a point where people care about what they have to say and their thoughts on music, that's still a gray area. And Jon and I don't really get into that in this, but I do know from my own 11 years in this industry that he has whatever that thing is that people look for when they're looking for someone to listen to, when they're looking for someone to help curate their taste in music, show them what's next, tell them about why they like the things they like. Jon has that gift, and hopefully you pick that up too while listening to this conversation. Before we get there, I do want to tell you a few quick things. First and foremost, this episode of Inside Music and all episodes of Inside Music are brought to you by Holix, the music industry's leading promotional distribution platform. Now, what that means is that Holix works with record labels, publicists, and independent artists from all over the world to discreetly share new and unreleased music. How do they do that? Well, if you head over to Holix.com, that's HAULIX.com, you can find out. And while you're there, sign up and you'll receive your first 30 days of service absolutely free. That's 1 month of service free just for signing up at Holix.com. One more time, that's HAULIX.com. And you should also be following Holix on Twitter. Not only can you learn about how to find a job in the industry, as well as plenty of jobs openings in the industry, but you can learn about this podcast. The Inside Music feed is also the Holix Twitter feed, so head over to @Holix, HAULIX, and join us today. Finally, I want you to check out Jon's podcast. Now, I know it might be a little weird for one podcast to tell you to listen to another, but Jon is really good at his job, and as you'll hopefully learn in this conversation, we do things differently. So head over to Brewtally Speaking and check that out. But right now, I want you to sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Jon from Brewtally Speaking. So you just told me before we hopped on here that you ended up going from 0 to 2 interviews today. Is that what happened?
Yep.
And how long have those been in the works?
Oh, fuck. Well, the New Year's Day one I just literally got done doing was in the works. I went to Detroit Let me look at my calendar. Went to Detroit 2 weeks ago. On the day the Hate Breed show was here in Grand Rapids. We went to Detroit to go do this interview, and literally this interview had been set up. They had contacted me probably a month and a half prior to do this interview, so it wasn't even something I asked to do. And we drove out there, my wife and I, and then it was scheduled for 8 p.m. I'm sorry, 6 p.m. It was scheduled for 6 p.m. And we got there. My wife had rented a hotel so we could stay. And as soon as I pulled into the hotel parking lot, checked my email. I missed an email 10 minutes prior saying that the interview had been canceled. What the publicist doesn't know is that I'm friends with one of the bands on tour with them, and basically they admitted that, or they told me that they were just standing around doing nothing all fucking day anyway. So my interview got canceled for more or less no reason. Probably because they just didn't want to do it. And then I just got done doing the interview, and the dude was like walking all over the place, so I just got a shitload of wind noise as the dude's talking. So it's great.
There's nothing better than the lack of respect that comes with doing an interview and halfway through hearing like the sound of like a car door opening and like the beeping, and you're like, bro,
Yeah.
what are we doing right now?
Yep. But I mean, the dude was nice, and it is whatever. But I was almost debating on a couple minutes before the interview telling them that I had something pop up and just saying, fuck off, we'll just reschedule it. But it is what it is. The Corey Brandon one, same thing. Like he back and forth. And then it was like, hey, I have time tomorrow at this time. And I was like, could you do it today? And he was like, sure. So it was an interview my co-host had been trying to set up, and I'm not the biggest Norma Jean fan, but I just know that it would be cool to have. There were a couple questions I definitely had for him, but it was a good interview, and he was really, really nice, and so it was cool. And then I just bullshitted my way into an interview on Friday with Danny Warsnop of Asking Alexandria for his solo record that's out or tour or whatever.
Yeah, his press cycle right now is interesting because he's doing a lot of. I've seen him work with a few outlets where I'm like, really, like this is where this is going, and I don't know if that speaks to what's happening with him or if it speaks to what's happening with that record,
Both.
or I don't know what's going
on.
Probably.
Both.
I like it. I like the album. It is. I just no one's talking about it, so I guess do all the press you can.
Exactly.
Well, let's tell people you have a podcast. It's called Brewtally Speaking, right?
Yep. From the Ashes of Johnson's Idol podcast, which is just a placeholder name, and I decided it felt disingenuous to have my name and face plastered all over everything after adding a co-host. And so in the new year, we were already in talks with joining Metal Nexus and decided that a name change would be good. And since my co-host and I were already talking about the beers and stuff that we were drinking on the podcast, but I would just cut them out because I didn't think anyone would care, we decided to kind of make a fun pun because I like shitty jokes, and I don't know if I can swear.
You can.
But I like shitty jokes, and I thought this worked, and I also thought it was indicative of kind of the conversations a lot of people who were listening to them were telling me that they were, which is, people really opening up and being honest with me about things, brutally honest at times. And so I thought it just kind of worked as a whole, and it was scary. It's going through a rebrand, after doing something for a year and a half and building it up and wondering, are you basically just shooting yourself in the ass? But long story short, that's the name of the podcast.
And how long have you been doing it?
Collectively, we've been doing it since the tail end of 2016. So as of like November of this year, it'll be 3 years.
And how many episodes?
How many episodes do we actually have done, or how many do we have posted?
Let's do both.
All right. Actually posted, we have a little over 170. I think we're getting ready to hit the 175 mark. And in the can currently, I have probably a good 15 episodes or so. We're probably about 2 months worth of material ahead at this point.
Yeah, you're one of the people that I admire for that reason, just because I kind of I get an episode out and then I have a blank slate again, and that's always been like my entire career in writing and in podcasting has been like this thing, and then we'll figure out what's next. And when I talked to you about your podcast recently, you were like, is it okay if you do my show, if you speaking to your show, if it takes like 2 months to come out? And I was like, man, I don't know what I'm doing next week.
Well, it's funny because we compared calendars recently, and your calendar looks exactly like mine. Like, we're at a lot of the exact same shows. But the thing is, though, is like I tend to find that I am not the norm as far as podcasts go. Like a lot of people seemingly fly by the seat of their pants just because you never know what kind of opportunities you're going to have. But I think from being a do-it-yourself podcaster and having to grow in creating content, like, initially the Untitled podcast thing, my initial concept was to get people on that people knew, but to talk about the things that they're not necessarily known for. So like a big first get for me was having Porter from Atreyu come on and talk about his photography, which at the time wasn't really a big widely known thing, and then now is kind of the crux of his VIP thing that Atreyu has been doing, where he'll take a handful of fans around the town that they're playing in and kind of teach them photography. So it is kind of interesting to see how that conversation happened, even though really it was just a conversation. Like, we talked about photography, we talked about band stuff, but like I thought that would be the only way I could get, band people I was interested in on. And then eventually it just kind of grew to where, kind of like a resume, or I think you would, obviously understand this doing this yourself, but there just kind of became this point where I got more comfortable and I had enough established guests on that people were like, no, we'll just do your show and we'll use it as a promotional avenue for the tour, the record, whatever. And I got more confident in being able to talk about a band's record, or being an avenue for promotional material. And I don't know. Have you experienced that too, where you were kind of a little bit unsure of yourself, and maybe that's why the thing took a little bit to kind of take shape?
Yeah, obviously I started off because I really liked long form conversations that I heard in other podcasts, and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if I could talk to people that I like for an hour? Because I hate setting up phoners, or I hate phoners, period. But I also hate setting up written interviews and being like, is 10 minutes cool? And being like, it hasn't run yet because we're doing a second part, but I got to get on the phone with Godsmack back in early April, and I got on the phone and they're like, this is supposed to be 10 minutes, but the band's running late, so it's going to be 8 minutes. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with 8 minutes? Like, unless I it's just not how I talk to people. And so so my whole thing was like, I'm the worst. I always tell people that I'm the worst writer because I'm really bad at self-editing, and a podcast format allows me to not have to self-edit that much. I can just like have the conversation and find it. I like to mold it. I'm like, what fascinates me about podcasting and interviews in general is like finding those nuggets, like finding that photography thing. And I most often do not get there without kind of organically talking about things for a bit, and then we kind of fall, like, this, like there comes a point in any conversation where you slip into like a groove, and it takes you, sometimes you need 10 minutes to hit that groove before you can like start just talking about things. And but it is a struggle, and sometimes I feel like the whole episode is like a wash. Like I had a guest recently who did the podcast, and the entire conversation I was like, this is not going well. Like we are just not breaking the ice. Like I'm not getting into something deep. And after it was done, I put it out, and then their publicist reached out and they wanted me to edit a bunch of things, which I hate doing, like having to go back, and they were like, can you pull down the video version and the audio version and like completely redo it and re-release it? No biggie if you can't, but could you do that? And so I ended up spending like 6 more hours like correcting it, and I was like, I feel like this is taking all of the heart out of the product. But that person and their fans were into the conversation. I was like, maybe it just wasn't a conversation for me. Like I feel bad if I don't walk away feeling like now I can call them by their first name. You know what I mean? Like now I'm like on a friendly level. And sometimes people just want to talk about, I'm sure you get this in interviews. You realize like when you get into it, like, oh, this person's trying to do something very specific, and I'm just trying to have a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's kind of the hard part is like, I've tried to be more present in the moment and not steer it in any way direction. But I do know that I like to, my co-host typically, and this is not like basically shitting on him, but he tends to be more in the moment. And that's something I've tried to take from him, because I think there's something interesting about the spontaneity that can happen when you're having a natural conversation. However, you were just making the comment about, you like more natural conversations to happen and don't like to be edited. I tend to find that through doing the podcast, I've learned to start editing myself, where if you kind of go back and I was misspeaking or didn't have the phrase I wanted, I stopped. and then start it again. And that's something I've learned because of editing myself. I've learned that if I give myself a definitive stopping and starting point, it makes editing way easier. And I think the flip side of that is also that hearing your voice and hearing yourself have conversations, you learn to be more of a listener, because something I tend to notice is that and I think a lot of people do this, is we are so ready to just start talking about the thing we're ready to talk about that we tend to kind of stop listening. And so as forth, I think it makes me a better listener and a better conversationalist, because now I understand what it's like to hear a conversation I've had and go, fuck man, I just stepped all over that dude. I didn't let that person finish their thoughts because I was so worried about trying to hit on a moment. And so at least now, if there's something I know that we're probably not going to get back to, if I don't hurry up and interject, I'll at least go, I hate to cut you off, but you're saying something that really excites me, and I want to kind of further explore this. Let's put a pin in this real fast and then explore this avenue we're going to go down, because I think it will lead to a better conversation. But I don't know. I don't know if it doesn't sound like that's how everyone podcasts or how everyone approaches it, but that is the interesting thing that I have taken away from doing this now for almost 3 years.
Yeah, and you use the word research when I talk to you about doing your podcast. You're like, I gotta like build something. And just my method, and this applies to how I write things too for people that have like read my features, long form features. Like aside from, I try to keep in mind the idea that most people go into an artist, especially if I'm interviewing someone that's kind of new, with like zero information. So I try to go into it with like what's propelling me into it is like, I like what you're doing. Now let's talk about it in depth, because I feel like sometimes if I get too specific, things kind of start to come off the rails. In that it becomes I lose that organic conversation element, because especially when it's like an album promotion, which is a lot of podcasting, is like, this person's going to come on your show, they have a new album coming out soon, and then I try to really hard to avoid being like, let's talk about this song, because as soon as you get into that, you're like, oh, okay, like
right.
What did I do here? So I try to steer it out of that, and with the hope that the conversation will continue at some point in the future. Like, it's all setting up franchises on the podcast for me. Like, if it goes well, in 3 to 6 months, you'll come back on the show, and then we'll pick up right here. But if I get into the habit of like ultra specific questions, sometimes I feel like, and maybe you have this happen too, I do this a lot more in writing, is that I wrote that story. Like, I'm done until you do like a bunch more things. I won't have another conversation to have with you for a bit, and I'd rather just like keep it going.
See, I've not had to deal too much with written interviews. When I was doing stuff for local spins, it was more show reviews, and I got to write one feature on the Dudes in Wilson. And the thing to me, and I very much approach everything, I tend to probably over prepare, but I like the fact that in my over preparation, in you looking at interviews, in looking at other written features on people, I can kind of see what's been done in the story that's been told a million times. So like when I did the feature on Wilson, the narrative of them at that time was, Wilson, they're a party band. They're a party band. They drink. They're hard drinking. They're hard partying. They party. And even to the point when I had approached the editor and I was like, I really think this would be a good time to do a feature on the band. And like, I know those guys. I've known those guys since, basically the formation of the band. So I have a long tenured history with those guys. And I think I can get something different out of them than anybody else will. And I ended up writing the feature, and I had a word count, and I knew I couldn't do anything in that word count, and I did the best I could, and I turned it in. He was like, this doesn't go anywhere. And I was like, it was the word count you gave me. And he goes, well, fuck a word count, just, write something until it feels like it's complete. And so what I ended up turning in was this basically long form feature on a band that comes from a blue collar background that has busted their ass to get everything that they got. And yeah, are they a good time party band? Absolutely. But they're able to enjoy their successes because of all the hard work that they put in, led by Jason writing and being the sole member at this point from the original band, from Chad with all of his connections and booking bands and so forth. And everybody that is now the permanent fixture in the band, bringing that unique and tangible thing that creates Wilson and what they are now. And I hadn't seen that story. And so to me, I think that's something in doing research, even if it's just a little bit, I think that's the thing that separates those that kind of give a shit versus those that are just kind of completing a task.
No, absolutely. Wilson's a good case. I actually have a long ass chunk of audio that I'm doing into a long form Wilson story right now that I have been avoiding. It's it's there. I have that and an Orville Peck interview that's also for long form that I'm just I'm just avoiding it. Like, it's in my head. I've got like the first few paragraphs going, but there's nothing I hate more than where I love the idea of doing the feature. I love the conversation involved in the feature. I love the access, but the act of like putting it down is it's a fight that and you would think like after 11 years I would be like I'll just do it, but no, I don't. It's an uphill battle.
Oh, I mean, I just did one chat a little while ago with Matt Fozzie, ex Taking Back Sunday, but of Rare Futures. I think once we covered kind of pre and post Taking Back Sunday, I had asked like the question I've been asking everyone lately because I think it's just interesting, which is EPs versus full length singles and so forth. Which is the way to go? Where is the music industry dictating you guys go as artists? That led to another probably 45-minute long conversation. So as a whole, the conversation is about almost 2 hours. And it's like, I really don't know if I need to separate it into like, this is the first half and then, the music talk secondly, just keep it all together, cut out the entire, the ending entirely and just keep it focused on what it is. But it went down some interesting avenues. And I think, the fact that he posed the question back to me, which is where the conversation really kind of started having more of that tangent-based dialogue, was really cool. And I think that's the hard thing is like, I enjoyed the shit out of that conversation, but I'm really not looking forward to going back. I already leveled the conversation. So at least like half of my work is done, but now I have to go through and tighten it up and make it really, a solid listenable episode. And I don't know if people like the long form hour plus long episodes. I don't know if people would prefer, the shorter ones, which is typically what we've been doing. But I think it almost makes it seem to be when we do so many short based interviews and then the episode as a whole is an hour, when you get an hour and a half long conversation plus the intros, outros or whatever, it makes that really special. And you understand that like, hey, this isn't the normal thing anymore. There must be something special about this one if they're willing to spend that much time with somebody.
No, I agree. I listen to your show sometimes. I don't have a lot of, I'm sure you have the same thing. Like you spend so much time doing the kind of thing that like, you just don't want more of it. Like I know a lot of, like anyone I know in a metalcore band, their favorite band is always like Death Cab for Cutie. Cause the last thing I want is to listen to more of this. But I listened to your Knocked Loose interview, which I dug. I've talked to Brian. He's been on this show. He was just a guest on your show. I imagine did you record that over the phone or did you do it when they were in Grand Rapids?
We did it when they were in Grand Rapids in their van.
Yeah, there you go. Which was in the beginning of April. I was at that show. Great time, good interview, and you had a great question, which is something that I've been asking a lot of people about. I think it's not just happening to Knocked Loose, but it is the new way that bands in that corner are breaking, and it's why people should listen to the episode for many reasons. But you guys talked to him specifically about the impact of memes on the trajectory of the band.
Yeah.
I have been telling everybody that little tidbit about people barking at him in public because I would have never thought to, not I wouldn't have thought to ask that maybe, but I would have never guessed that it was happening, period.
Same.
Like when he said that, I was laughing, and like I told my girlfriend when she got home, I was like, hey, I heard this crazy thing in this podcast today with the guy from Knocked Loose, and she was like, really? And I was like, I know, right? Like, who are these children?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's just a difference in age. Like, it wouldn't even dawn on me to do something like that. Right. And then, even trying to think back to, I don't know, like, there's not anybody I can think of that had a distinguishable characteristic of their vocals that I could be like, oh, like, I guess, we kind of make fun of the early 90s, like, Creed or late 90s and with Creed and the thing or whatever, but, that's more of a genre than it is an individual person. Like, we're not, I couldn't imagine going up to Chino and, I don't know, doing an inward scream at him because that's what he does.
Yeah, or like seeing Jeremy McKinnon from A Day to Remember and be like, you gonna disrespect your surroundings today, man? Like, it's just, it's so on the nose and so cheesy that I was like, people do these things to you? Like, I felt so weird to think of an artist painting themselves into that corner because it's like, I'm obsessed with unintended consequences of like songwriting. And usually, at least on this show thematically, is more than often than not what it boils down to is you write an album that's like, I wanted to kill myself, here's why, and then you have to spend the next forever listening, having kids come up to you and be like, here's the time I tried to kill myself, and you have to like carry the weight of all those stories forever because you decided to share your own. Never have I ever thought of it in the idea of if I write something that's really catchy, it's going to feed back on me like the way a catchphrase would on a TV show.
Right.
It's like
Yeah.
people quoting Stewie from Family Guy to Seth MacFarlane. It's just so crazy to me. So who was the most recent guest on your show?
Literally, most recent was Corey Brandon, and that I did earlier, and then Nikki Misery from New Year's Day. Corey from Norma Jean, that is.
Okay,
Those literally just happened an hour ago.
okay, but
Um,
that's out and for the world to hear.
my co-host did an episode. Actually, here's a fun story because it kind of parallels with what you were just talking about a little bit ago. So I had Andrew Michael Wells of Dance Gavin Dance on. More so for me, Idola. They're more of an independent band at this point. I went to the Detroit date on the Periphery Dance Gavin Dance tour that was going on, and I had talked to Spencer earlier in the day. I went and grabbed dinner with Andrew, and then we did the chat in the basement of the Royal Oak Music Theater in one of the green rooms. And I was so looking forward to posting this episode because it is the most crazy conversation that I've ever had on record. We literally were just talking about the microphones that I have, and then it segued into something else, which segued into something else, which long and short of it, it got really real. I'll don't necessarily want to give too much away because after I sent it to Andrew to have management approve of it. We basically ended up finding out that when Andrew joined Dance Gavin Dance, part of his contract stated that he couldn't do any press, or at least unapproved press. So basically, we had a really, really, really real, raw, honest conversation. I didn't edit any of it. I just mixed the levels so at least you didn't hear all the background noise. And then my co-host and I also matched the intensity of the conversation in the outro, divulging a lot of personal experiences that we've both gone through. And, I was really proud of this episode. Like, I was really looking forward to a lot of people hearing it and getting to know more about the co-host and I, and getting to know more about Andrew, because the last time he had come on, he shared the fact that he had recently been diagnosed with Lyme's disease. And growing up in Utah and talking about growing up in a very overly organized religious area. And so we equally met that and exceeded the seriousness of a lot of the things that Andrew was going through. And to be told basically that it can't come out was really disheartening. I literally was watching Papa Roach at Sonic Temple, which was kind of a highlight. My wife was really happy, and my work day was done at the festival and enjoying the bands. And I get this text from them. It's like, yo, dude, we can't put this out. It breaks my contract that I signed. And, I really appreciate your time doing it. And eventually, we'll get it out. But for now, it can't come out. And it's really rough. It's really rough to know that you put your heart and soul into something, and to have a real moment kind of be taken away just due to the fact that it's not deemed acceptable from somebody. It's not the right climate to put out some of the things that were said in the conversation. And the irony is that's basically exactly what we were talking about, is the fact that the things that we were talking about, and I know I'm being very vague, but the things that were needed to be said need to be said. They need to be talked about. What I will say, at least to kind of give it some context and a frame of reference, is I was going to put this out, and I was really looking forward to putting it out this month, given the fact that it is Mental Health Awareness Month. So take away from that as you will, but it was one I was really proud of, and kind of have to sit on it is really a bummer. I think you can actually kind of hear it in my voice that it still is resonating with me. And we did that conversation like a month or so ago, but that was the one I was looking forward to doing. That was supposed to be the most recent episode. My co-host thankfully had done an episode with an up and coming band called The Wolves Are Closing In. Interestingly enough, we don't really deal with a whole lot of smaller bands anymore, just kind of due to what you were saying of having to kind of provide everyone with the generic questions of getting them familiar with who they are. And my co-host had found them on something, the production sounded great. They had like a video and all this kind of stuff. And he had thought that they were a band for a while, which we actually ended up learning because he did the episode himself. He ended up learning that basically the band has recorded their record. Like, they kind of did everything themselves. They made the video themselves. but they've never played out live. They have been in other bands, they've been in bands together, but they decided to flip the script on what a lot of local bands do, and instead of just playing out and playing out and playing out and growing your band name and your brand, they decided to get a recording that sounded good, get out videos, and start hitting the ground running. So by the time they play their first show, they have something to show for it, as opposed to just, hey, we're a band, we have nothing. Hope you like us. So that was pretty interesting. That is our most recent one that we just dropped yesterday, as of when we're talking.
Do you have what are you going to in the new? Are we going to be at something similar soon? I'm going to Bloodfest Saturday night, and then
I'm not going to Bloodfest.
You going to Bless the Fall on Sunday?
Yep, I have a spoiler. Have a as long as it gets confirmed and nothing changes, but I will be talking with Bo that day.
Okay. I'm working on a different band on that day. I've already had Palisades on the show twice this year, so we got to take a Palisades break. I mean, he was literally like 3 guests ago. Those guys are great. This will be their 3rd time in Grand Rapids in 6 months. Very excited to see Palisades. Yeah, not even in 3 months technically.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get one with one of the other bands on the show, but it's not confirmed yet, so I'll leave it up in the air. We'll see what's happening. I know that there's a new album on the way. We'll say that much.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Maybe the plan in the future would be that we the best way to do a cross podcast would be to have all of us together interview someone at the same time and then just do it that way. Like that's the crossover episode.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you told me once. Well, let's close on this because I thought it was funny. When I mentioned doing something together in the first place, you talked about how I used to have a music website. Some people know that I've listened to the show for a while called Under the Gun Review that eventually sold, and then I moved on to do Substream, and now I contribute to alternative press and stuff like that. But the first thing, Under the Gun Review, you told me recently that you applied one day and you weren't a part of it. And I didn't even know that you had applied because I wasn't always the guy that reviewed that stuff. So when was this?
Well, it was through Grant actually that I saw that Under the Gun had posted a thing like, hey, we're looking for writers. And I kind of fancied myself like I like writing. I don't know if I'm necessarily good at it. There's works that are out there of mine that I've done, so take it for what it is. And I was like asking Grant, I was like, yo, I'm interested. And he was like, well, submit what you've done. And I was like, well, I've not really done anything. Like, it's something I've always wanted to do. I just never really pursued it. And he was like, well, we can't really do anything. And then I was like, well, can you give me like just basically a task to do? And I'll do like a, something for you, just to give me a task to do, like assign me a band or something. I'll write something about it. And if you like it, then there we go. And we can get going. And if not, then, at least I know where I stand. And he was just like, unfortunately, that's not how this works. And turned into a thing for me where that really motivated me to, I mean, it's nothing against you or him, but it was just like one of those, I was like, man, like what the fuck? Like this industry is all about who you know. And I kind of figured, knowing somebody that kind of was the higher up that, I might get a fair shake and at least get an opportunity. And I did not. And instead of just being like, well, fuck them and fuck him, I decided to use the motivation to try to find a different avenue to get into it. So a friend of mine that does local concert photography around here, or no, let me take that back. Actually, I got ahead of myself. There's a website here in town in an organization called Mosh Pit Nation, and they basically are pro metal shows, anything to do with rock metal here in the local Grand Rapids and really Michigan area. They do a great job of, exposing local bands to a wider demographic. They put on local showcases, promote shows at the intersection and so forth that, like when a metal band's coming through or whatever. And so I had made a comment about something. I think I made a very vague Facebook post of just like, oh, I got turned down from this thing, didn't even get an opportunity, would really like to, this, that, and the other. And the person that runs it, Jen, hit me up and was like, hey, if you want to do something, just go ahead and do it. Like, we got some CDs that, need to be reviewed if you want to interview bands, so on and so forth. So I did some written interviews with TJ Miller of Still Remains, Alfonso from Heartsick, now then No Life. Did a couple album reviews, some show reviews as well. Then that turned into constantly seeing local photographer Tony Norcus constantly at shows for local spins, and him just kind of being like, oh, there's some metal shows, and we've been talking about covering them, like, because I do them, but like nobody that works for local spins really is knowledgeable on metal or hardcore. So a lot of times, like, I have to write these like very generic, like show reviews and so forth. So the first band I got to do was Every Time I Die, which is like my favorite band. And it was really cool. Local Spins basically doesn't really cover metal or hardcore that often in written form. And so I did that show review, did the thing I always do where I kind of shared it and encouraged my friends to share it. And it turned into one of the top stories of the week. And that posted on Wednesday. So, I mean, the fact that it was outperforming a lot of other stuff that had been posted earlier in the week was really eye-opening. I kind of got dubbed the metal guy, even though I have done show reviews for Janet Jackson, Lil Wayne. There's a local, I don't know if you want to call him hip-hop, but like Tunde, I can never pronounce his last name, Olaran or something like that. But I've covered a wide spectrum of things, but I got really agitated with the fact that I was not able to do anything beyond the metal world, even though I love a lot of different styles of music. And that that kind of pushed me into doing the podcast, just something completely different, where I was like, if I want to interview someone in the pop world, I will. If I want to interview someone from a death metal band, that works too, because not everyone is so singularly interested in one thing. I think if you are the minority as opposed to the majority. And interestingly enough, I found a lot of success doing this, which is weird because it is the only thing that I have really ever done in my life where I have put as much work and sacrifice into it, and any of the work is coming to fruition and paying off. It's very weird. I don't know what the ceiling is for this thing. I don't know if I've already hit it. But I still feel like I'm turning the corner, going to something, and I'm sure you can speak to this from having gone to a lot of festivals, whether it be a Bloodfest or whatever, locally or beyond. But getting to go to something like Sonic Temple this past weekend, which is was Rock on the Range, has been predominantly the biggest rock festival in the United States for the last 10 years. Getting to be approved to cover the festival as media and getting to see like iHeartRadio and some of these other way bigger avenues of promotion and so forth was really eye-opening, and just kind of made me feel like, it's happening. I'm doing something and I'm being rewarded for all of the hard work that's going into this. And it's surreal. It definitely kind of lets me know where I'm at, because there were some interviews that I wanted and I didn't get. And so it's like, okay, like that's where I'm at. I'm at this level right now, and I'm hoping, very goal-oriented, and like you kind of have mentioned before, very driven. So it's already got me kind of going like, okay, so in the next year, like when I hopefully can go to Sonic Temple again next year, I want to be able to get these bands. You know what? Matter of fact, I want them to come to me, because like they see the value in what I'm doing here. And I don't know. I know that was a very long, winding answer to your thing with Under the Gun, but basically Under the Gun and getting turned down was the spark of me pursuing a creative outlet and wanting to do something music-based.
What I love about that story is that I'm adjacently in it, and it's the first time I've ever heard it. It's, I have no point of reference. I mean, I totally believe that happened, because it seems like how that probably would have happened knowing that person, but yeah, well, I'm glad that it worked out for you. And I mean, honestly, speaking from whatever platform, wherever I'm at, I think that the question of like where you're at is kind of a vague one, because sometimes you can be at Rolling Stone and get turned down to talk to Dave Grohl, but he speaks to some random website. It's just like, it's a lottery to some degree. But
can we talk about that for just a second?
Yeah.
There have been interviews, like when I do my research for interviews, and I'm sure you get this too, and it is absolutely infuriating to talk about this as a grown adult. Like, I'm in my mid-30s, and to have to talk to other grown professional adults about Facebook reaches or your likes or followers or things like that is infuriating. And I can't tell you how many times in doing research for an interview where, I had to fight to get this interview, like 30, 40 emails just to get, 20 minutes with somebody. Excuse me. And in my research and seeing what questions have been asked numerous times and what hasn't, or, whatever, I will find the most bumfuck outlet that literally, like, if it's on YouTube, has under 200 views. And I'm like, how did this person get this? Like, you can tell they don't know anything about this band. It's a bullshit interview. Like, how did they land this? Yet I have to, like, fight for everything I'm getting. And I'm at a point now where I don't have to fight as hard. Like, a lot, like, the work is finally starting to speak for itself. Because unfortunately, actually, no, fuck that. Not unfortunately. Fortunately, people see enough bigger names, and you can't get those if you suck. Like, I'm sorry, like publicists are gonna go back to the people, they're gonna talk to their artists, and they're gonna be like, yo, that interview was lame as shit. Like, I'm not doing that. And I think in this day and age, like, it's so quick to be able to vet people and see who's worth the interviews and who's not. And to see some people who, this sounds super shitty, I understand that, but to see people who I don't feel are deserving of an interview when I feel like I've put in a ton of work and I know I would kill the interview is so disheartening. But it also just drives me to be even better. There is someone here. Here's a fun story that also has driven me to succeed with this podcast. I am not going to mention names, but it is someone who used to put on a festival here in Michigan, and it got pretty big and no longer exists. But I had asked to do media at one point on the festival, and I was told that I wasn't big enough to do it. I had then asked that person if they would come on to the podcast because I like talking about behind the scenes music stuff. And to me, having used to book shows, I understand how the process of putting on a show and how frustrating it is and how arduous it is. I can't imagine booking a festival, let alone growing it every year and getting some of the caliber of bands that this person was getting. So I wanted to know more about that and kind of put a spotlight on him. Sorry, cut that part out if you can. A spotlight on them and what they do. And they were like, well, what's your reach? What's this? What's that? And it's like, dude, what the fuck? I know you personally. Like, it's one of those things where I realize that this industry is kind of, it is all about who you, like, it's all about the numbers and what someone thinks that they can glean off of you. And my wife actually posted a photo of me watching the Foo Fighters, and this was kind of wrap it all together. And I've never seen the Foo Fighters. I've always wanted to see the Foo Fighters. They are one of my last few bucket list bands I've never gotten to see. So it was very fortuitous that I was able to see Foo Fighters because I got approved to cover Sonic Temple Festival. So my wife took a photo of me wearing my Foo Fighters hoodie that I bought earlier. And yes, I'm that guy. I will wear the band t-shirt while I'm watching the band. And, you know, there's the whole stadium in front of us because we're watching it from the back of the stadium. And my wife, sorry, I'm kind of getting choked up thinking about it. My wife took this photo of me and just wrote, like, you know, you did it. And the quote was, you know, from the person who has kind of spurned my passion to just succeed and kind of rub it in their face, even though they have no fucking clue that they are like the catalyst that drives me. It was just like, you know, you're not big enough. That was what they said. So my wife ended up using the thing like, you've made it. Are you big enough yet? And it was one of those things that it's like, I guess if there's nothing that anybody who will listen to this, like, I'm nobody. I've never played in a band. I've never done anything of any significance. Everything I'm doing is solely because I had a passion and I wanted to do it. And I have a tremendous fear of failure because I've quit my 9-to-5 to really focus on doing this and taking it as far as I can. So I have no excuses for why this can't succeed. And to see how far it's come has me very encouraged, but I'm also severely motivated by proving to others who have no clue that they are my benchmark of failure or success. Like, I hope that eventually this person would love to come back and be like, yo, I'd love to come on your podcast. I'm like, sorry, you're not big enough. Like, I know that's super fucking petty, but it is what drives me. Things like that, like being told no and being said that, like, I don't have the experience or whatever. It's like, I know how hard I'm willing to work for something. And it's like, for a while, like, I resented you, not so much Grant, because he kind of made it seem like it was more you. But it's like, for a while, I did resent you because I was like, you're the reason I couldn't get this thing I wanted to do. And I know that's really stupid because it's really not. It 100%, I didn't have the skill set to pull off what you were looking for. I didn't have the requirements, and I get it. But my way of looking at it was, I don't need those things. I have this intangible that I can offer you that nobody else will have. I'm more driven than anybody else. And this has been one of the few things where I've been able to kind of show everybody that it's like, I have no skill set to do this. I don't know anything about audio engineering. I know nothing about broadcasting or interviewing or any of this stuff. I just do it because I have a passion for it, and I'm not going to let it stop me from achieving what I want to do with it. And as a result, I've taken it pretty fucking far, considering I'm just a nobody here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, who loves music. And if nothing else, all the people who come out and tell me, like, I love what you do and I love this interview or whatever, I hope somebody hears it and it motivates them to be like, you know what, I can fucking do whatever the podcast equivalent is for them.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. It's cool to have negative feelings towards me. You're not the first person I've met that's told me a story that I did not know was a thing, and then I've been like, oh, okay, I get how that works. I mean, it happens. It's just the nature of the business. But if I want to apply my own example to the whole thing, obviously, I've had I have a pretty popular is the wrong word, pretty well known back and forth with alternative press over the years, and even when I am indirectly mentioning them or I don't tag them in the thing, it tends to get back to them, and I've had publicists reach out to me and friends in the industry and been like, bro, you are shooting yourself in the foot. And I've been like, I don't care. They don't they don't get me. I get them better than they get themselves. And then at some point, everyone's just kind of caught up in the struggle themselves. You know what I mean? Like, for every amazing opportunity one person gets, they have their own list of like, I wish I could do X, Y, and Z, or I could talk to X, Y, and Z. And you usually the ironic thing being that you've probably interviewed somebody who say wants to interview Dave Grohl hasn't gotten a chance to talk to for whatever reason it happens to be, and it's that back and forth of like no one's at the top of the ladder, and even when you get there, even when you get the opportunity to talk to those biggest names, in my experience, the very next week the person you want to talk to the most is playing to nobody, and the challenge is selling that story. It's easy to sell talking to Dave Grohl. It's great for. Earlier this year we had we're still in works for it, but there's a chance that we're going to have Henry Rollins on Inside Music. It'd be a crazy opportunity. Way into it, obviously. However, like as soon as I heard and saw Orville Peck in Detroit earlier this month in May, he played at PJ's Lager House, holds like 150 people. And like that was more exciting to me because I was like, now this is what I want to do. Like this, the challenge is more making people like that's what excites me about it. And then I was like, oh shit, like Billboard's already talked to him, and he's playing 150 people a night. So now I'm like, okay, well there's such a disparity here. Like I know great bands that can't get into Billboard. This guy's playing to 150 people a night. Billboard's all over him. It's like the nature of the beast in some weird way. But over time, I think if you're smart and you stay in the industry long enough, you're just like you said, you get over it. You get over it, and then you're like, oh, at the end of the day, if we can build together, that's ultimately the best outcome for everybody involved. And if that can't happen, then being petty is also an option. And it's perfectly fine to be petty sometimes. Sometimes it's just good to quietly do it. I've had people who burn me really bad in the Under the Gun days, including people mentioned in this exact conversation, and then would later on falsify information about their performance and then put me down as their reference for all that false information. And then you have that opportunity to be like, oh, now I control fate's in somebody else's hands now. And it comes back around. But I'm glad that we got past it, even though I didn't know that we had beef between us. I'm like a rapper who isn't paying attention to his timeline.
Right.
But
well, I'm pretty quiet about it. Like one of my favorite one of my favorite things of to quote as of late has been Enzo Amore. I don't know if you're into wrestling at all. If not, it's fine. The sentiment still applies, but the quote is, because obviously wrestling, you're self-promoting and promoting other things and so forth. But his catchphrase for a little bit was "real G's move in silence like lasagna," and I was like, "Yup." That sounds fucking stupid, I know, but it's like there's actually some truth in there where it's like, just kind of let the work do itself, and when people will take notice eventually, hopefully.
Yeah, Lil Wayne said that too at some point. I don't know who said it first.
Did he?
But yeah.
No.
If you say it fast enough, doesn't it sound like it came from a rap song?
Yeah.
But no, if it gets you, it gets you. See, I'm the opposite. If I have a problem with somebody or if I think somebody is full of themselves or something, I actively seek out the conversation. So people might not even know it listening to this show, but there have been people that have even come on the show where the interview, the impetus for me being like, let's have them on the show is because I was like, I gotta figure out this bastard. Like, what's going on? Like, let me just talk. Let's just talk about it and let's make it entertainment, because at the end of the day, like, I ultimately know that it's not going to go. Like, in my experience, almost anybody that I've ever thought was terrible or had a chip on their shoulder, I talked to them for 5 minutes, and you're like, oh, You got your own problems. Like it's
Right.
it's very humanizing. And so like the goal of the podcast is in part for myself is just to be like, oh, okay, so that's your struggle. Like that's your thing. And that if I don't get to that in the conversation, then I feel like it's a failure because I'm like, I told you all my weird problems. So tell me some of yours. What's your weird?
Right.
What's your weird stuff? But I think we've covered a lot of stuff here, and I do hope to do your show at some point in the future. Not putting you on the spot here. If I do, they'll hear it in the fall, which is
Well, I
fun.
might be able to push it ahead a little bit so it coincides with something. I mean, a lot of times the nice thing is like doing interviews like where I like to try to do things like where it's not necessarily focused on anything. Like it's not, oh, this tour you're doing or whatever. So like if it comes out like a month after I've talked to somebody, it's not stupidly obvious that it's like, well, that was a stupid conversation because it's all built around this tour that's already done.
Yeah. Well, I have two things, technically three things maybe that are in the works right now that aren't public yet, that are unrelated to Holics and unrelated to this podcast, but are very much in the world of music journalism that I'll tell you about when we're not recording, that maybe would work as a indirect but still useful reason to talk to me about this kind of thing. So people can look forward to that. Brewtally Speaking is spelled BREW. Speaking.
Yep.
Is it brutallyspeaking.com? How do we find the podcast?
Nope, no website. I had one before on the other thing, and it just really didn't seem advantageous to have one from my perspective. So basically, any social media platform, you can find us at Brew Speak Pod. If you want to find the podcast itself, we are on Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, pretty much anywhere and everywhere you listen to podcasts, it can be found. Put it on YouTube, just search out Brewtally Speaking Podcast. If you go to any of the social media links, obviously I post the episodes and so forth on there, so just it's super easy to kind of find it from there. But chances are you might find an episode, you might listen to it and go, holy shit, I didn't know that's where this headline came from. But we are quietly known as the podcast that you see a lot of headlines from, you just didn't know what it was from.
There you go. There you go. And the show's doing well, so congratulations on that. And
Thank
then
you.
do you have personal channels that you want people to check out, or is it just the podcast?
I get really weird about people following me. I know that might be weird. I recently had an instance where somebody, I assume through the podcast, contacted an avenue through the podcast and basically said some not so great things about my wife. So I tend to try to keep things relatively low-key on that since after that happened.
That's fair. That's fair. Maybe we'll do another episode down the road where we talk about relationships and the role they can or cannot play in music and stuff. I think that'd be fun because, as you probably know, I used to be married, so you have both sides of the coin here. So we'll get into that. We'll get into that. People, these are great teasers for people. We're going to talk about divorce and journalism. It's going to be fantastic. But
actually, relationships have been a big topic on the podcast lately, so
yeah,
not really out of the realm of plausibility there.
Well, let's say that it doesn't fall out of the realm of plausibility with the other things I'm going to tell you about when we get off this, so people are jealous of our post conversation. But I'm going to see you in person on Sunday. If people want to find you or I, and they are ever in West Michigan, go to a show, and they'll probably find us.
Yep.
And
thanks again for having me on.
Absolutely, man. And people check out Brewtally Speaking, and I will let all of you know if I happen to appear on Jon's thing.
Awesome, thank you.